Imagine waking up one day with the comforting thought that you've finally healed. The wounds of your past no longer bleed openly. The heartbreaks you once carried like broken glass in your chest have dulled into faint scars. The traumas that haunted you in restless dreams now feel like distant echoes, muted and manageable. You breathe, and for the first time in years it doesn't feel like drowning. You smile, and it doesn't feel like a lie. But then, in a quiet moment, perhaps while looking into the eyes of someone you love or standing alone in a darkened room, you sense something strange. Despite all the therapy, the journaling, the affirmations, the rituals of self-care, there remains a heaviness, a void. Not the raw pain of yesterday, but an absence. The healing was supposed to free you, yet you feel tethered still, as if invisible strings pull you back toward the same patterns, the same cycles, the same haunting sense of incompleteness. This is the paradox. Healing may stop the bleeding, but it does not always restore life. Healing patches the wound, but the wound is not the whole story. A healed body can still feel empty. A healed mind can still be imprisoned. A healed heart can still refuse to love. What if healing itself has become another mask? Another identity to wear, another performance to perfect? What if in your quest to mend, you unknowingly settled for survival when you were meant for transformation? You see, healing is often presented as the end of the journey, the final victory over pain. But what if it is only the beginning? What if healing, though necessary, is not sufficient? What if the trap lies in believing that the absence of suffering is the same as the presence of wholeness? Consider this. A person who survived betrayal may heal enough to trust again, yet still never know the depth of intimacy that vulnerability requires. A person who survived abuse may heal enough to function, yet still live in the shadows of self-doubt, afraid to step fully into their power. A person who healed from loss may move forward, yet secretly fear joy, knowing that all joy risks grief. So the haunting question remains, is healing the destination, or is it merely the threshold? If healing is the end, then why do so many who claim to be healed still feel restless, disconnected, hollow? Why do the scars we polish into badges of honor still whisper at night? Why does "I've healed" so often sound like "I've stopped crying but I haven't started living"? Perhaps the truth is that healing is not wholeness. Healing closes the wound, but it does not awaken the soul. Healing returns you to neutral, but not to freedom. Healing erases the pain, but it does not teach you how to transmute that pain into meaning. And here lies the hidden trap. When you believe healing is enough, you stop walking just before the true path begins. You confuse silence for peace, numbness for strength, avoidance for growth. You stand at the doorway of transformation, but never step through. This is not to diminish healing. It is essential, sacred, and brave. But it is not the summit. It is the base camp. The climb remains. The mountain is still before you, and the summit is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of purpose. So ask yourself, what if the reason you still feel hollow is because healing only cleared the ground, and now you are meant to build? What if the wound was never meant to disappear, but to serve as the soil for something greater? The great question then is not have you healed, but rather, what will you do once the healing is complete? Will you remain content with scars, or will you let those scars teach you how to live differently, more deeply, more courageously than before? This is the hidden trap of healing. It feels like an ending, but it is only the prologue. And the story of what comes after is the one most people never dare to write. Healing is praised as the pinnacle of human resilience. We applaud those who say, "I've healed," as if it is the final seal of victory over suffering. Yet beneath this narrative lies a quiet deception. Healing, when understood only as the cessation of pain, is incomplete. It is like patching a cracked wall without asking what caused the foundation to crumble in the first place. The wound may be closed, but the structure remains fragile, the deeper fractures untouched. Why does this problem exist? Why is healing celebrated as if it were transformation, when in truth it often stops just short of it? The roots stretch deep into both psychology and philosophy. From psychology, we know that the human mind craves closure. When pain overwhelms us, the first instinct is not growth, it is survival. The nervous system is wired to move us out of danger. Once the bleeding slows, the psyche breathes a sigh of relief and says, "Enough. This is safe. Stay here." The brain mistakes relief for freedom, stability for wholeness. And so people settle. They mistake "I no longer hurt" for "I am now alive." Carl Jung would call this a refusal of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole. For Jung, true growth requires not only mending what was broken, but also integrating what was hidden. The shadow, the unlived parts of ourselves, still waits in the dark. Healing alone does not confront it. A soldier may heal from the horrors of war, yet still refuse to face the anger and grief that lurk beneath his silence. A survivor of heartbreak may heal enough to function, yet still carry an invisible shield against intimacy, terrified to be wounded again. In both cases, healing has stopped the bleeding, but has not opened the door to transformation. Nietzsche pushes this further. He warned against the comfort of survival, the tendency to stop striving once suffering is dulled. For him, pain was not an enemy to escape, but a crucible to be transformed. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he wrote of the necessity of death and rebirth, not physical death, but the death of old values, identities, and illusions. Healing often prevents this death. It calms the storm but refuses to let the old self collapse. And without collapse, there can be no rebirth. Schopenhauer, darker still, suggested that much of what we call healing is simply another attempt by the will to cover its despair. We distract, we mend, we manage, but the underlying restlessness persists. This is why healed people can feel a hollow ache, a quiet dissatisfaction. The problem was never only the wound. It was the self that carried it. Without confronting that self, healing becomes another layer of illusion. Philosophy and psychology converge on a brutal truth. Healing focuses on wounds, but ignores the void. And where does this void come from? Look closer at society, and the roots grow clearer. We live in cultures obsessed with productivity, appearances, and survival. People are rewarded for getting back to normal. After tragedy, you are praised for being strong if you return to work, if you smile again, if you stop speaking of your grief. The hidden message is, heal just enough to function, but do not question the system that wounded you. Aldous Huxley, in Brave New World, warned of this cultural anesthesia. In a society obsessed with comfort and stability, people lose their capacity for depth. Pain is numbed, not transformed. Healing in this sense becomes an act of compliance. It soothes individuals just enough to keep them in line, but it never invites them to ask the dangerous questions. Why did this suffering exist in the first place? What truth does it reveal about the way we live? This is why Viktor Frankl's insights feel so urgent. Having survived Auschwitz, he argued that suffering itself demands meaning. Healing alone cannot provide this meaning. It only removes the sharp edge of pain. Transformation begins when suffering is asked, "What now? What truth do you carry? What direction do you point me toward?" Without that question, the healed remain restless, because the soul does not hunger merely for safety, it hungers for significance. The hidden problem, then, is twofold. On the personal level, healing tempts us into complacency. We confuse the absence of pain for the presence of wholeness. On the societal level, healing is commodified, celebrated as an endpoint, precisely because it prevents us from asking deeper, destabilizing questions. Think of it this way: healing closes the wound, but transformation requires walking back into the battlefield and asking why the war was ever fought. Healing returns you to where you were, but transformation takes you to where you have never been. Healing gives you rest. Transformation demands rebirth, but rebirth is terrifying. It means admitting that the self who was wounded must die. And death, even metaphorical death, is the one thing the ego resists with all its might. So we cling to healing as if it were salvation, when in fact it is only a resting place on the way to something greater. So, pause and ask yourself, how much of your life has been spent chasing healing instead of transformation? How often have you told yourself, "I'm fine now," when what you really meant was, "I'm no longer bleeding, but I'm still afraid to live"? This is the trap. Healing soothes, but it does not liberate. Healing restores function, but not meaning. Healing allows survival, but not transcendence. And so the tension builds. If we stop at healing, what happens next? If we never move beyond it, what consequences quietly unfold in our lives, shaping our choices, our relationships, our very sense of self? The answers are not comforting. Healing, when mistaken for the final destination, leaves behind ghosts that are harder to detect than raw wounds. Open pain is obvious, it screams, bleeds, demands attention. But the healed yet untransformed self, that one is quieter, subtler, and infinitely more dangerous. It can live years, even decades, behind a convincing smile. And in the stillness of night, when distractions fade, it whispers, "You survived, yes, but you are not yet alive." The unseen consequences of confusing healing for wholeness ripple across every dimension of life. The hollow life, one of the first consequences, is the hollowing of existence. A person may heal enough to function, to go to work, to raise a family, to meet obligations, but inside they remain restless. They feel an emptiness that no amount of achievement, wealth, or relationships can fill. This is because healing removes pain, but does not provide direction. It clears the stage, but does not write the play. Without transformation, the healed self becomes a blank canvas that never gets painted. Jean-Paul Sartre called this state bad faith, living in denial of one's freedom, settling for roles instead of authenticity. You stop bleeding, but you continue drifting. You become efficient, but not fulfilled. The tragedy is subtle. You appear healthy, but you live half dead. Recurring cycles. Another unseen consequence is the repetition of old wounds in new forms. Healing may resolve the visible injury, but if the underlying patterns remain unexamined, the cycle repeats. A person who healed from betrayal but never confronted their fear of abandonment may find themselves sabotaging intimacy again and again. A person who healed from childhood neglect but never addressed the void of self-worth may drift toward partners who echo the same neglect. A person who healed from burnout but never questioned their identity in work may find themselves collapsing into exhaustion once more. Neuroscience explains this in terms of neural pathways. The brain, conditioned by years of repetition, follows the same grooves unless rewired by conscious effort. Healing soothes the sting of memory, but it does not automatically carve new paths. Without transformation, we live in loops. The illusion of strength healing often creates a polished illusion of strength. You can tell the story of your survival, display your scars as symbols of victory, and receive applause for your resilience. Society loves survivors. It celebrates their return to normal. But here lies the danger. This illusion of strength masks fragility. The healed person may look strong but still avoid risks, vulnerability, or true intimacy. They are afraid of reopening the wound, so they retreat behind the armor of strength. Friedrich Nietzsche warned against this armor. He argued that true strength is not avoiding pain but transmuting it. When healing becomes a shield instead of a doorway, it imprisons as much as it protects. You survive, but you do not soar. The cultural trap. On a societal scale, the consequences multiply. When entire cultures equate healing with wholeness, they produce generations of people who stop short of transformation. Mental health industries often emphasize symptom relief. Less anxiety, fewer panic attacks, improved functioning. While vital, this focus risks reinforcing the trap, teaching people that if the symptoms are gone, the work is done. Aldous Huxley foresaw this in Brave New World, where pain was medicated away, but humanity's depth disappeared with it. A culture that numbs pain without transforming it becomes shallow, fragile, and easily manipulated. Comfort becomes the highest value, and growth the rare exception. The stagnation of the self, perhaps the most devastating unseen consequence, is stagnation. When you stop at healing, you remain who you were minus the bleeding. But who you were was already incomplete. Carl Jung's process of individuation insists that becoming whole requires integrating the unconscious, embracing the shadow, and uncovering potential buried beneath pain. Healing alone does not force this confrontation. It simply stabilizes the old self. You remain the same character in the same story, only slightly less wounded. And so the question emerges, is it enough to simply return to who you were, or are you called to become someone entirely new? 6. The restlessness of the soul. At the deepest level, the soul knows the difference between healing and transformation. You can silence the body's pain, quiet the mind's storms, but the soul continues to ache. This ache often manifests as chronic dissatisfaction. Nothing feels enough. You achieve goals, but they taste hollow. You surround yourself with people, but still feel alone. You appear successful, but inside a voice whispers, "Is this all?" Viktor Frankl understood this hunger when he wrote that humans can endure almost any suffering if they have a why. Healing provides comfort, but not a why. Without meaning, the soul remains unsatisfied, endlessly searching, endlessly restless. The trap tightens When these unseen consequences take hold, the trap tightens. The healed person may even resist transformation, clinging to the identity of survivor. Pain becomes part of their story, and healing becomes their badge. To go further, to let go of that identity, to embrace true rebirth, would feel like betraying the very thing that gave them strength. But this is the cruelest irony. The longer you cling to healing as the end, the further you drift from the life your suffering was meant to awaken. Healing was never meant to be the mountain. It was only the base camp. The climb toward transformation still waits. So pause and ask yourself, have you truly broken free, or have you only escaped the worst of the pain while remaining tethered to the past? Are you alive or merely functional? Are you transformed or simply healed? The unseen consequences are not small. They shape destinies, relationships, and entire societies. And unless confronted, they condemn us to lives of quiet compromise, lives that survive but never burn with purpose. But rebellion is possible. To step beyond healing is an act of defiance, a radical refusal to remain trapped in survival. It means rejecting comfort as the end and demanding something greater. And that rebellion is where we must go next. There comes a moment when survival is no longer enough. You sense it in the hollowness that lingers, even after your wounds are healed. You see it in the mirror when your eyes tell a story your smile denies. You feel it in the quiet ache of evenings when, despite everything you've overcome, you still ask, why does my life not feel like mine? This is the moment of rebellion. And unlike healing, rebellion is not passive. It does not wait for scars to fade. It is a conscious, dangerous choice to confront the hidden trap, to step beyond the threshold of survival, and to claim the life that lies on the other side. The first act of rebellion, question the narrative. The first step is deceptively simple but profoundly disruptive. You must dare to question the story you've been told about healing. Society rewards those who appear better. Therapists may even say, you've made great progress, you're functioning again. Friends celebrate your resilience. You learn to wear your recovery like a medal. But rebellion begins when you whisper, functioning is not the same as living. Nietzsche urged us to distrust all values that keep us small, tame, or complacent. He believed that human greatness requires the courage to destroy old idols, even the idol of I am healed. By questioning this idol, you destabilize the foundation of the trap. You refuse to accept the shallow version of freedom. The second act, confront the shadow of healing. Here lies the paradox. Healing itself casts a shadow. It whispers that safety is the goal, that the absence of pain equals victory. But if you obey this shadow, you will never risk the vulnerability transformation requires. Carl Jung taught that integration demands turning toward what we most fear. The rebellion, then, is to ask, what part of myself did I still leave behind even after healing? Was it my anger tamed into silence? My vulnerability hidden under armor? My dreams buried under practical choices? To rebel is to bring these disowned parts back into the light. To refuse to let the mask of healing replace the mask of suffering. The third act, embrace death and rebirth. True transformation requires a death, not of the body, but of the self that clung to survival. Healing preserves identity. Rebellion dissolves it. This is why so few dare to rebel. It feels like dying. Arthur Schopenhauer insisted that most of life's suffering comes from our refusal to let go of the self's illusions. And Nietzsche, more radical still, declared that one must become the phoenix, burning in the fire of one's own destruction in order to rise anew. The rebellious act, then, is to let the healed self collapse. To say the person who survived was brave, but I will not remain them forever. I must become someone new. This is the leap healing never demands, but transformation always does. The fourth act, reclaim. Meaning. Viktor Frankl argued that survival without meaning is mere existence. Healing allows survival. Rebellion seeks meaning. This means asking the dangerous questions, what did my suffering reveal about me? What values must I create from it? How must I now live so that the pain was not in vain? The rebellious soul does not merely want the pain to stop. They want the pain to matter. They want to weave it into the fabric of their identity, not as a scar to hide, but as a map to follow. The fifth act, live the risk of wholeness. Transformation is not safe. To break free from the trap of healing is to risk being misunderstood. People will expect you to be the same once you've healed. They will not understand when you change careers, end relationships, abandon old roles, or pursue desires you once denied. But rebellion accepts this risk. To live whole is to no longer be predictable. You may lose approval, but you will gain authenticity. You may face fear, but you will no longer live in bad faith. And this, paradoxically, is freedom, not the absence of suffering, but the presence of truth. Examples of rebellion history is full of those who refuse to stop at healing. Dostoevsky, imprisoned and broken, could have spent his life quietly surviving. Instead, he transformed his suffering into novels that pierced the human soul. Nelson Mandela, after 27 years in prison, could have emerged merely healed of his bitterness. Instead, he transformed that pain into reconciliation, reshaping a nation. Even in smaller, unseen lives, rebellion takes form. The mother who, after years of abuse, doesn't just heal and move on, but raises her children with a radical honesty she never knew. The artist who, after heartbreak, doesn't simply recover, but pours their pain into work that awakens thousands. Healing would have left them functional. Rebellion made them immortal. The call of rebellion. And so the rebellion to break free is not about rejecting healing. It is about refusing to confuse healing with wholeness. It is to see healing as the doorway, not the destination. It is to walk through that doorway into the unknown, into the chaos of rebirth, into the risk of becoming fully alive. Ask yourself, where have you mistaken healing for completion? Where have you stopped short of the life your suffering was meant to open? Where are you still safe but not yet free? Because rebellion is not an event, it is a decision. A decision to keep walking. Even when the world says you've healed, you're done. A decision to refuse the hollow life, to step beyond scars, to transform pain into purpose. And yet, even rebellion is not the summit. Beyond rebellion lies something greater still, the final, most powerful realization, the moment where transformation itself dissolves into something larger, something that reframes not just your wounds, but your entire existence. That is where we must go next. Imagine standing on the far side of your healing, past the rebellion that stripped away your masks, past the risk of becoming someone new. You've endured the fire, the collapse of the self that once clung to survival, and now in the quiet after the storm, a deeper truth begins to emerge, one that does not just redefine your wounds, but your very existence. The truth is this: healing was never the goal. Transformation was never the goal was wholeness. The illusion of brokenness. For much of life we believe ourselves broken. Every wound confirms it, every failure deepens it, every rejection screams it. And so we chase healing as if we are fragments waiting to be glued back together. But the ultimate realization is that you were never truly broken. Carl Jung spoke of the self, the totality of who we are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, wound and wisdom. From this perspective, you were always whole, even when you suffered. The pain was not a sign of incompleteness, but of disconnection. Healing stitched the surface. Rebellion forced you inward. But the truth waiting at the summit is that wholeness was never lost. It was only hidden. You are not a shattered vase glued back together. You are a vast tapestry where even the torn threads belong. The shadow as guide all along, the shadow you feared was never your enemy. It was your teacher. The pain you wanted to erase was the compass pointing toward your transformation. The suffering you cursed was the soil of your awakening. Nietzsche, who declared, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," was not speaking of brute survival. He was pointing toward this truth, that suffering is not merely endured but transfigured. The fire burns away illusion until only the essence remains. The very thing you thought destroyed you was carving you into clarity. The ultimate realization is not that healing protects you from suffering, but that suffering itself was the path to wholeness. Freedom Beyond Survival. Viktor Frankl wrote that freedom lies in the space between stimulus and response. The healed self reacts less, the transformed self chooses differently, but the whole self realizes something greater. Freedom is not about what you escape, but what you embody. Freedom is not the absence of wounds. It is the presence of meaning. It is the courage to say, everything that happened to me belongs. Every scar is part of my design. Every loss carries the seed of my becoming. This is why so many, even after healing, feel restless, because they mistake freedom for safety. True freedom is not safe. It is expansive. It is the willingness to live with open hands, knowing that pain may come again, and yet choosing to live fully anyway. The reversal of the trap here lies the final paradox. The trap of healing dissolves the moment you stop chasing it. When you realize you were never broken, healing shifts from a desperate necessity to a natural unfolding. You no longer ask, "Am I healed yet?" because you no longer define yourself by wounds. You no longer ask, "Will I suffer again?" because suffering is no longer a threat. It is a teacher. The reversal is profound. What you once ran from becomes the very ground you walk on. Living as whole to live as whole does not mean you will never hurt again. It means hurt no longer defines you. It means you can grieve without collapsing, love without clinging, and fail without despairing. You do not hide your scars, but neither do you cling to them as proof of strength. They simply exist, like chapters in a story that no longer needs to end in tragedy. In this way, wholeness is quieter than healing, subtler than rebellion. It does not announce itself with grand declarations. It simply permeates. It is in the way you breathe more deeply, the way you speak with more honesty, the way you carry both joy and sorrow without needing to resolve them into opposites. Jean-Paul Sartre once said that man is condemned to be free. The whole person is no longer condemned. They embrace freedom willingly, not as a burden, but as a gift. The poetic ending, and so the ultimate truth dawns. Healing is not enough because it is only the silence after the storm. Rebellion is not enough because it is only the tearing down of the old self. What you were truly seeking was never to be healed, but to be whole. Look back at your wounds. Do not ask whether they are closed. Ask whether they have taught you how to live. Look at your scars. Do not ask whether they prove your survival. Ask whether they illuminate your path, because the final, most powerful realization is this: you were never broken, only unfinished. The pain was not punishment, it was initiation. The healing was not the end, it was the threshold. The rebellion was not destruction, it was preparation. And now at the summit, the horizon opens. Wholeness. You are no longer just the one who suffered. You are no longer just the one who healed. You are no longer just the one who rebelled. You are all of it. The wound, the scar, the fire, the ashes, the rebirth. And from this vantage point, you see clearly. Life was never about avoiding suffering, never about polishing scars, never about clinging to safety. It was about stepping into the terrifying, beautiful truth that everything belongs. Wholeness is not a destination. It is the realization that you were home all along.